Okay, let's play a game where you get real sad! Man, it's been too long since I played an overly complex JRPG and played something real depressing like, so I can, feel something.
When was the last time any one of us felt anything?
Yo, same! Oh hey, Valkyrie Profile. Now, some people are gonna take issue with my pronunciation, Valkyrie, but in my defense,
it is actually pronounced as Valkyrie.
And anyway, where's your English degree, sweaty? It's a weird little PS1 JRPG from '99, devved by Triace, the Star Ocean people.
I wanna take nappy time with you, okay?
It also got a PSP release that's usually considered inferior, but 90% of that is weird sprite stretching, so if you don't know what I'm talking about, you probably don't care that much. Here's the pitch. Imagine a JRPG where hard mode is easier than easy mode. I know.
KBash, what the f are you talking about?
But that's just a fan meme, something I read while researching the game. It's more accurate to say that, with a refined understanding of the game's mechanics, hard mode is much more enjoyable and open to player expression. But that's hardly as fun to say, so pitch number 2. Play a game where Guts from Berserk is a major party member. Sure, it's not confirmed, but come on. And really, who needs a tall tale to sell their favorite game when Valkyrie Profile has such chaotic design? How about, hitboxes on basic attacks?
Shut up!
An absolute library of menus?
Oh, I love homework.
Watching every recruitable character die? No! Sure, it might not be for you, average viewer, but I'm the demented one here, okay? So why don't you go grab your little sippy cup and your snacks, and I'll just open a window into my twisted world. Here it comes! The void tendrils are wrapping around your limbs and you're being consumed! Valkyrie Profile's a tough nut to crack. The world-building choices are fascinating. For one, it's a Fantasy Earth analog, so you'll see, medieval fantasy Europe in general, but also Japan is here. And an inexplicable Japanese restaurant in Whitebirdton. Okay, Valkyrie Profile, I can dig it. That's not the weird part, though. What's weird is this isn't Earth, per se, but Midgard. So what ancient Norse folk thought the Earth was, because in spite of churches and Shinto shrines and whatnot, the actual gods of this world are the gods of Norse mythology. Odin, Loki, Thor, etc. That's right, Valkyrie Profile said extant Earth religions are fake. The one where Loki gets by a horse and he births an 8-legged horse baby, that's the real one. I kid, but in my defense, it's pretty funny. You don't deal a whole lot with the gods in this game, but you do work for them, as Valkyrie, real name Lenneth, a servant of the gods tasked with collecting and training human souls into Einherjar, holy soul warriors to battle for the gods in Ragnarok, the big ol' end-of-the-world slam jam! It's weird that they need humans, but whatever. I like to think the gods are just really bad at the great cosmic game of Mario Party and need help.
Mortal, I call upon you to complete this mashing minigame in my name.
No! The trick is, Lenneth doesn't choose just anyone. Like the actual myths, she only reveals herself to the recently slain to judge if they're worthy of ascending to the closest thing to heaven in universe. So you end up watching a lot of death.
Oh my god!
I gotta say, a lot of the visuals are striking, but I wasn't sold until that exact moment. I just stared. The game rejects traditional storytelling, and probably mostly due to budget or disc constraints, you're not fed a winding adventure with plenty of inter-party grab-ass time. Instead, you get National Geographic on the mortals of Midgard. It's depressing. Despite playing a godly entity, the world is pernicious, cruel, violent, endlessly embroiled in war, and you can't do anything about it, except help others get out. Damn, VP playing at a Matsuno level work. This is gonna be a banger. There's a pretty long-winded tutorial segment at the start after something like 20 minutes of cutscenes, so it's hard to say the game comes out swinging, seppuku aside, but there's a lot to know going in. I made a comment about difficulty, so let's mention it now. I recommend playing on normal in like everything, but here especially because easy is the kind of mode that'll give you half half the experience. And if you ever want to get really into Valkyrie Profile, you need a working understanding of its quirks, and normal's the way to do that. Eventually, you're dropped into the world with no immediate goal. World's ending, go. Unfortunately, much like Nights in the Nightmare and Yggdra Union and whatever other rock kinography I've played, Valkyrie Profile accurately simulates the experience of a new car owner popping the hood for the first time. Yeah, you're fooled, kiddo. I love the gameplay loop too, especially on first pass, because you're watching all of this horrible stuff happen while trying to take the mechanics in, like, hey, check this out! Oh my god! Damn, that was f***ed up. By the way, did you know you have to equip all those reaction abilities you bought to actually use them? No! Oof, major noob alert. Anyway, wanna watch another snuff film? No, please! This ain't your average JRPG, okay? It's turn-based, sure, but it's got action-y dungeon traversal with light platforming, puzzles, it's got combos. It's got combos! It's that special kind of bizarre JRPG crack I wish the more popular franchises experimented with. Sometimes it really feels like there's people who love JRPGs and people who love JRPGs. You know, the difference between people loving movies and loving films. But let's back up. One of my favorite things, which I understand others get stressed out by, is the countdown to the end of the world. Yeah, acknowledged, that's kind of ominous. Majora's Mask is kind of spooky too. But to be clear, the game isn't trying to punish players for screwing around as much as keep them on task. You're a Valkyrie in service to Odin the Allfather, you know, God. Roleplay or die. And the game has this handy feature where you'll be told exactly where to go with a button press. Finally, it's complete. After years of labor, my life's work, the Power Sounder 5000. Now, if you're wearing headphones, you might be hearing some familiar sounds in the video. Who them tracks? Who them tracks? It's Motoi Sakuraba again. Absolute legend, king of world fantasy music. Why would I critique this stuff? I ain't let that shit on play. I sat my white ass down and listened. The world is big, and you can just waste time screwing around in towns with no shops, or worthwhile NPCs, or side quests, or goals, so it's worth listening in on the world. Though you find out that most chapters, at least on normal mode, only need you to recruit 1 or 2 characters, which will cost you 2 periods out of 24 per chapter, and about 2 dungeons per chapter as well. So the game's really, really generous with time, granting all kinds of extra slots to go visit the towns, where various characters died for special items, and even grinding opportunities if you really think you need it. You don't, but it's nice anyway. I ended up skipping ahead to the next chapter consistently. Time is hardly the biggest hurdle. You're made to run through dungeons, like, directed to them, but not every dungeon has plot significance. Sometimes you just gotta go to the caves. Here we are at caves! Do you know the difference between a stalactite and a stalagmite? Leave a comment below! Other times they're relevant to the characters you recruit or some local villains, so whatever. I guess I don't really need airtight justification to perform basic JRPG gameplay, okay? I'm in there. Aside from being beautiful, guys, please, I can't look at this without longing. Aside from being beautiful, the dungeons are handled 2D side-scroller style. It's such a weird game. Almost all combat is optional. You can skip past enemies by jumping or straight up freezing them. Amazing accessibility option, by the way. The dungeons get really creative sometimes too. Sure, a bunch are just running and jumping, like bad Mario levels, but Valkyrie can use her magic to create crystals for platforming, burst the crystals to propel herself, and shatter crystals above her to create fading diamond dust platforms. So refreshing for a JRPG. And if you feel like keeping competitive with level ups, you kick combat off by slashing at your enemies. Major props for stuffing the frequent genre anxiety of endless random battles by putting the burden of choice on the player. In 99, combat itself is a little weird. On your turn, the goal, generally speaking, is to chain as many hits as possible, release a ton of crystals from enemies, and fire off giant special attacks, like named Riviera the Promised Land type special attacks.
Finishing strike.
Okay, this is hype! But really, the true value of these super attacks is hammering one after another into an obnoxious boss that kicked your ass so you can say, "F you. Eat a dick, you. You." Cathartic. By the way, have you seen these animations? They're beautiful, like water. Oh my god. Seriously, you go around collecting these normal-ass dead people, these peasants, and the very second they're in Einherjar, they can utterly obliterate people with crazy anime special attacks. Turns out dying a cold, cruel death in an uncaring world can be highly radical, actually. Combat's got some quirks, though. I mentioned hitboxes. I think I am gonna kill a person. I mean, look at this hot nonsense. I know it makes sense, but stupid. It's actually cracked to tack hitboxes onto your button presses. It's a JRPG. Sorry, I don't know how to process this. It's awesome. Means performing combos has a dexterity timing component, so you're always engaged in the basic battles. It's mind-blowing, really. I think the major issue is that not all hitboxes are created equal. Arngrim here will straight up miss floored or overly small enemies that aren't being juggled, even though his sword is the length of a bus. This spear girl has really strict timing to land her full combo, and it's really annoying in general. Several characters are easier to use for no real reason. They were just gifted with better hitboxes. To be fair, we can't all have a janky hitbox. And some of the coolest characters just suck. This gets complicated further by weapon equips and customization options, like changing around which move goes off in your combo first and last. But yes, Valkyrie Profile wants you paying attention, and sometimes it doesn't pan out perfectly. But the hole goes deeper. There's status ailments to contend with. There's random enemies combo blocking, forcing the player off, or making them guard break the enemy with powerful strikes. There's a pile of reaction abilities letting you dictate how your character behaves in certain situations. You can set your characters to automatically consume healing items with an ability. There's so much fun, customizable junk going on under the hood, and it's all the kind of stuff you won't have a perfect handle on a first playthrough. You can run through the game dry as or cook the thing right. It's all in the prep. Before talking bosses, I gotta mention boss rewards. You're given some treasure chests containing artifacts of the gods after each boss kill, and the game prompts you to send them back to heaven or keep them for yourself. You can keep almost every artifact and still get the normal ending, so don't worry too much. It's just kind of funny, like, no, yeah, you Odin, I can't see what this sword does. I have no idea, but I want it. It's mine! Honestly, bosses are the biggest challenge in the game, even though this one puzzle really gets on my tits. The bosses range from tutorial level jokes, like use the fire attack and the boss will die, to I am gonna retroactively make Triace a subsidiary of EA. They're not even worth talking about in detail. Several of the hardest boss fights are just like the floor bosses in Persona 3, so some of the hardest and most specifically designed fights in JRPGs. And no, not difficult, just specific. Like, if you don't take out these enemies in this way, the guy behind the meat shields will send you to the Shadow Realm. Like, hit this enemy too lightly and your team will explode. Like, oh no, you need the bow equipped on Valkyrie to make this one work. Whatever, been there, done that. I don't respect it, but most bosses aren't that bad anyway. They give enough wiggle room that your own solutions are possible, just not on the first pass, probably. All of this stuff comes down to team setups. Every member of your squad is affixed to a face button. That's how you control them in combat, no movement. That's all automatic, it's just timing. How you select and build your party makes or breaks the experience. You're handed a lot of menus up front, and we all know how I feel about menus, but then I keep coming back, so really, I guess I just like accounting. Catch y'all in 10 years doing your taxes. So to cut a lot of crap short, you can notch a lot of little aspects about your characters and choose which weapon types you want in your party, which matters a lot. Bow people are in short supply, sword wielders are everywhere, but combo really well in general. Mages are broken. Look, we don't need to get into it, but you can absolutely crush the game with a party of mages. It's like they tried to balance mages out by limiting their ability to attack at regular intervals like everyone else, but then loaded them up with the only utility in the game, and insane damage, and straight up broken abilities. Okay, so balance is a little schwacked. Engaging normally, you're probably not gonna stumble upon that little factoid. The gods basically lower their heavenly vacuum, i.e. you, and suck up mages like dirt. Oh, we haven't even talked about transfer yet. On top of finding dudes to recruit and dungeons to delve, the gods ask for very specific things at the start of every chapter. One of your warriors, that is. A guy who's strategic, a strong warrior, someone who's skilled in disarming traps and knowledgeable about zombies. Maybe as a bonus, he's got a 10-foot Now, some people hit a wall with this system. It kinda sucks. You go out of your way to recruit these people, get attached, watch them die, but no. Odin needs someone to shave horse hooves or something. something. Please, Valkyrie, send your greatest female magician with the biggest dumpy. Odin, for Christ's sake. It's like Fire Emblem permadeath, only you choose the guy who dies and everyone else is protected. Actually, never mind, that sounds awesome. Okay, Nils, into the Soul Crucible you go! You don't have total control over who gets sent, though. Some characters are straight up labeled unfit for heaven. Guts, Arngrim, namely. That's the big one. To be fair, I'd be intimidated too if I were the Lord of the Gods and my servant tried sending the most fitting replacement imaginable to my court. You have to make heroes presentable for Valhalla though, and some of these guys are real winners if you catch my drift. So you level up their hero traits, things that gods and Valkyrie don't possess, for example, and make them more heroic so you're more likely to win the war above. Things like increasing cool-headedness, reducing cowardice, that kind of stuff. After that, you load them up with whatever Odin asked for and send them away. But it's okay, at the end of every chapter you can see how they're doing in Valhalla. Apparently they can die up there, but I followed instructions and never had that happen. It's good that the game does this, by the way. You're fed something like 17 characters, and they all get their last moments in death cutscenes, generally, but that's about as far as development and screen time goes for most characters. It's cool that you can get a little more out of them, see their personalities come alive a bit, even if it's framed in text. That got me thinking, you know what, maybe y'all don't know me very well either. KBash facts. I am a triplet. I have consumed intestines. I have never been high. One of those is a lie, but I think it's pretty obvious which one. Now, the last major hurdle, I think, the perfect capstone to the little trifecta of, so far, timed play and ritual character sacrifices being graded. You get praise or admonishment from Odin's wife Freya at the end of each chapter.
About your performance, it is magnificent.
Ooh, I love praise from Mommy Freya! When you're winning, it feels good. You get handed a pile of points to spend on items, equipment, and healing stuff, so you're massively incentivized to follow orders and instructions. It's worth mentioning that it's basically impossible to fulfill every demand handed down to you, so just do your best and send up one guy per chapter unless the game asks for more. You'll do fine. I keep remembering weird shit to mention. You need those points, like as many as you can get, because there aren't any shops in the game. Yeah, all these beautifully rendered cities, nothing in them! There's just treasures and dungeons and a materialized point menu letting you create magical equipment. And materialized stuff is better than anything else anyway, because it can't break. Something that will happen with the artifact weapons and treasures you pick up in dungeons. Oh, it says 10% chance to break. I think it means 10% chance to last one single button press. Jesus! But wait! It gets better! The difficulty you select determines how many dungeons and which dungeons appear in which chapters alongside which characters are recruitable. That's why easy is bad. You actively lose access to most of the cast, several leveling opportunities, the best items in the game. You lose so much. The game actively punishes you for picking easy mode. It's like an awful trial mode, so I gotta stress again, pick normal, and try hard mode later. Valkyrie Profile is a mess, in the best way possible. Brings me right back to Dept Heaven and all of that psychotic bullshit. Like, this is a game torn between genres, actively experimenting with what's possible and keeping difficulty pretty stiff, but fair. It's the kind of thing that ropes you in once you get a taste for its systems, something really considered. You can tell it's not the full version of the designer's vision. Some characters get walked off screen and die, some backstories are short and others excessive, but that doesn't mean the game and the story don't have value. Valkyrie Profile's little story trick, that is, probably not having the budget to show all these character death cutscenes and have a traditional JRPG story simultaneously, so just not having much to go on actually works in the game's favor, especially with the multiple endings. You get the sense pretty early that something's off. Valkyrie having a name, Lenneth, the occasional character being mentioned who doesn't appear on screen, frequent references to tragedies in the past. There's a point where you see yourself and Arngrim in a vision from the past, and it's just not. It's another Valkyrie named Hrist. So some funky shit's going on, okay? And it gets weirder than that. In the mid-game, an optional dungeon opens up, the Tower of Lazard Valeth, this guy who's very clearly evil. He's literally wearing glasses, my guy. And we find out that not only does this guy love Valkyrie, somehow, but he's been making replicas of her too. Okay, getting slightly uncomfortable. Oh, and please, if you pick this up for fun, you don't have to run this dungeon. It's optional for a reason. It's extremely frustrating to navigate, even when making use of the game's dungeon map visualizer, because the elevators, and this is the confusing part, rise one floor at a time and reset to 0 after the top, but there's no indication. Dumb. Just dumb. The game even has a long backstory cutscene detailing Lenneth's life before being what she is now. As you'd expect, it's heartbreaking and cruel, but thankfully contextualizes a lot of previously shown imagery. Though it raises some questions, yeah? Is she an Einherjar raised up by some other Valkyrie and rose through the ranks? Why does Lazard have clones of her, and isn't he immortal? How would they even have met? It's even possible to unlock optional cutscenes by sending certain characters to Asgard. This game is sad. No shit, right? You're watching innocent people die like every 30 minutes, but it strikes such openly melancholic notes with its protagonist, someone sworn to her duty, forced to witness endless strife and act her part, and realize she can never be with her childhood friend, this guy, the one person she recognizes in the entirety of Midgard. And the player can find this cutscene never knowing any of that info. It's just presented to you if you send them off to Valhalla. And if you dig around in the menus, you realize that Lenneth has a stat that nobody else does, a seal value, and it's just listed with no explanation. What's important here, above the nouns and specifics, is the game wants players playing multiple times. Can't use all the party members on your first go, can't play every dungeon, and definitely can't get every ending if you play just once. It's a pretty quick game, it's got engaging dungeon design and combat, so why not play again? So let's talk endings. Spoiler warning, only if you're sold. If you got this far, if you do manage to screw everything up, you can unlock a special ending where Freya comes down and ends it early, by straight up killing your defective ass. It's worth noting that she says you're a faulty machine here, so you can spoil yourself real early by just not paying attention. That's funny. The normal ending, the one most people are getting, has Valkyrie and friends battle in Ragnarok, beat back the forces of evil, and take the fight all the way to the throne of Surt, king of the giants. The battle goes well, it's not super challenging even compared to some of the optional sub-bosses in the same level, and the game ends after a few cutscenes, but it feels so flat, like everything was just part of some greater cycle and it'll happen again. You even get put back asleep to be reawakened later on. So what's going on here? The true ending, in true video game fashion, requires this unbelievably tight laundry list of player actions in order, or else you're getting ending B. And fair enough, it's a game where a generally lawful character, under duress from the gods themselves, has to break fate, literally awaken from her stupor of dogma and see the world how it is. Doing so screws with Lenneth so badly that her soul shatters, leaving Hrist behind. Arngrim and Mestina, this you don't need to know about Mestina, it's fine, gather the pieces and, with Lazard, go to store Valkyrie's soul in a homunculus and destroy Hrist to reawaken Valkyrie, because Valkyrie is actually 3 entities in one, and only one can be active at any given time as a failsafe against this exact kind of thing. Then out of nowhere, unless you've been paying attention to progress screens of your characters and figured out that Loki's a pretty bad dude, and also in Norse mythology in general, Loki betrays the gods and kills Odin. Valkyrie regains her senses and goes off to bury the guy when he destroys all of Midgard. The Valkyrie is basically a god like Odin now, in a half-elf homunculus, and thus has the power to grow and change unlike the typically static entities in Asgard, so when everyone on Earth dies, she gains tremendous power via empathy for their deaths and uses it to reshape the world and obliterate Loki. Yeah, no, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in retrospect, but goddamn, it kicks so much ass when you're playing it. They really hid like an hour of bonus content and extremely world-relevant cutscenes behind some of the tightest requirements I've come across. It's like they gave the player a 3-wheeler and made him solve that equation the movie math prof can't solve to upgrade to a regular bike. Naturally, the game's really good at making fans into sycophants, really asking them to engage and learn about the game with its myriad systems, complications, hidden recruits, and the quest for ending A. But it's even deeper than that. One of the major conceits in the game is that the gods aren't really anything like humans. Life on Earth is cyclical, so humans are reborn, reincarnated, I guess, endlessly endlessly as the world turns, and the gods watch it happen so much, they just don't care. They're ageless entities, but Valkyrie was a person, and she's capable of feeling, regardless of the controls the gods put on her soul. Despite being overtly lawful, she has a great deal more empathy than any of the gods do for humans and the loss they experience. That's probably why she goes out of her way to recruit some of these people. Most are heroic, but some are straight filth. To even offer them a chance at heaven means Lenneth has more forgiveness in her than the average human. Shoot, even after killing Loki, she waxes poetic about not understanding him instead of spitting on his corpse. I love the way the game puts you in her shoes by letting you meet all these people and cry through all the death. I love that you have to engage with the world and its cultures and people in poverty and rich assholes, even if it's all really rushed, because they couldn't allot opulent amounts of time and resources to each area and character. I love that Valkyrie's forced to listen into the world itself to figure out where to go in-game. She has to engage with the world at a level no one else can. And this empathy is her core strength. It's what carries her through the finale. If you get through even one playthrough, you'll love the game and the world. And the true ending, though fully riddled with questions, still manages to hit such a hard payoff. Watching the most deserving person in the game, the greatest candidate for God, become a literal god of creation and set the world right. It's the kind of thing you wish for in the real world, and it takes an unholy mountain of effort. The wind blows, the grass shivers, and the shadow known only as KBash materializes once again. Valkyrie Profile 2 draws near. I took a look back at Valkyrie Profile the first recently, and you know, that game's really cool, and I was excited to play the sequel, released by the same team, not the same lead dev, nearly 7 years later for the PS2. That's a hell of a jump, a whole console generation, and basically the amount of time it takes Link to drop a whole tier delineation. What were we talking about? And Valkyrie Profile 2 has a lot going on. It's something jerkingly beautiful. It's got a real-time combat system, and it fills in notable lore holes by acting as a prequel to the first. It's needlessly complex. It was dogged by reviewers for high difficulty and obfuscated system stuff. Okay, I am absolutely dripping with anticipation. I'm gonna do it! I'm finally gonna play Valkyrie Profile 2! What the hell did I just play? Valkyrie Profile 2 starts in a small port city with the protagonist Alicia having an apparent schizophrenia episode in public. In reality, the soul of Silmeria Valkyrie is currently inhabiting Alicia's body because there are 3 Valkyrie personalities and only one can be active at any given time in the designated Valkyrie body. And it ain't Silmeria. And yes, this is all really high concept if you didn't play the first game, but whatever, it's 2 girls, 1 body. Most intuitively, yes thing I've ever heard. Though the game makes use of 3D rendering, moving away from sprites and getting with the times, you're still only allowed to move through cities 2D side-scroller style. I think it's cute. Nice little stylistic callback without having to break the bank, and trust me, the game's content is elsewhere. The cities are glorious, sun-dappled pit stops, and not a whole lot more. Listen here, you little shit. The story picks up when you recruit a very strange man to help ferry you to Alicia's home, Japan. I love this scene. Silmeria says, "Talk to him." Alicia says, "Who?" And we get,
"Who else could I be talking about? That guy right there."
Literally though, it's a bar full of like farmers, bakers, and green-haired Legolas. Who the fuck was you thinking, Alicia? Was it Farmer Benjamin you were confused about? What a cousin Jeb, though? You'll move along, recruit some characters. Silmeria takes control of Alicia every now and then to summon Einherjar and grease the plot. The early party is pretty tense and untrusting. It's some really fertile ground for a found family type game, but a few things are, frankly, weird. If you played the original or watched anything on it, you'll know it's a real hourglass kinda experience. You're on the clock from the outset, and I really enjoyed that more focused ride because while it seems daunting, the actual time economy is forgiving if you're concentrated on finishing the game, handing out plenty of periods for grinding and never really asking too much of the player. It truly is that high-class meal that shits out good, you feel? The sequel, conversely, well, VP2 sits in your stomach undigested for a long time. There's no time constraint. You're free to handle things at your own pace. Unfortunately, it's a much longer game as well. While the story is linear, progression isn't, requiring the player to grind out levels, grind out ability points, leave the main path for side quests and optional areas to stay competitive with the main path. It's actually fairly frustrating. Like, not on its own, but coming off the first. That game felt like a true forgotten gem. VP2 feels like fishing up some kind of bootleg Moby Dick. Extremely strenuous and nobody cares. Still, the game's got plenty on offer, so let's do some appraisal. I'm handing out my very first KBash gold seal of approval for aesthetics. This shit whips. This is incredible. I kneel for well-executed low fantasy, austere, mildly ethereal landscapes. Cities and towns. Look at that snowfield. Look at that regular field. I can literally feel the wind. Look at this place! I'm sorry, town's called Coriander, and it's literally where I want to retire? You know when you feel a deep sense of longing and it's like a low-grade stomachache? You ever basked in the pale moonlight set amidst cold stone and deep greenery? I'm begging VP2, open the portal. I need this. Let me in! VP2 likely took the 3D approach in response to the changing gaming market, and while it's sad to lose sprited assets, that low-grade, high-craft charm, this is how to shift gears. And let's not forget the music. That's right, Motoi Sakuraba's back once again. I think I've name-dropped him maybe 5 times this year. Man's a legend, and he's there, personally panpiping for you in the background while you wander through the fields and plumb the depths of dungeons.
You can never escape.
But that's the aesthetics. Not everyone cares over much about presentation or music. Thief 1 is a game, and it's pretty fun. So how's the play? I guess what blows me away about VP2 is general reception from fans. A lot of people love this game to death, even though it's nothing really at all like the first. And in a lot of weirdly anti-player ways. Maybe some people thought the episodic delivery of hastily wrapped character backstories was tacky or unfulfilling. I guess that's possible. But just like how the game is cropped short because you're headed to war at the end of the world, Valkyrie Profile crops its cutscene time to show lives swept up in the pernicious reality of mortal life. It works with its themes and context. Valkyrie Profile 2 is much more lush. It contains multitudes. It feels more complete. Not a Spartan race to the finish, but a measured and sometimes meandering waltz through the countryside. You'll wander through major dungeons, as one does, triggering the occasional cutscene, completing the occasional puzzle. They seem innocent. Crystal magic is different this time around. Yes, you can freeze anyone you come across, but now you can swap places with them by firing another blast, opening up all kinds of platforming nonsense. Unfortunately, this comes at the cost of wall climbing and other tricks, so it feels more like a side grade. Really helpful for speeding through areas once you know what you're doing, though.
Yeah, teleport schmaster.
The low-key evil threading the walls comes in orb format. Basically, you'll pick up stones throughout the dungeons, some of them loose and some of them set in pedestals, and you'll more or less install stones in these veins, these daises, to grant passive buffs or debuffs to both you and your enemies in combat. It's a lot to explain, but the gist is you end up running around a little longer than necessary in any given dungeon to craft a good set of conditions to fight bosses under. You might be thinking, evil? Strong choice of word, bud, but I'm telling you, with VP2, the key commodity is time. Everything is time. A lot of stone transferal requires points, which are doled out in sparse quantities after combat, so sometimes you just get caught grinding. Shoot, even being made to backtrack frequently gets annoying. The game's about 50 hours, and half of that is busy work. And here you are. Okay, the original game let you recruit warriors by watching them die sad, cruel deaths in a careless world. Okay, trade offer. I receive your tears, you receive a character. Very antagonistic relationship, but hey, it fleshed out the world and made every character matter. And since each one was unique with different animations and all that, they felt genuinely important and interesting, like deluxe character pickups. Not just dudes you sent up to Valhalla for war, but a pool of talent you could pull from to form the ultimate fighting force. In Valkyrie Profile 2, you find glowing weapons on the ground and suck the latent soul out of them or something, and then you've got a new party member. No cutscene or anything. No backstory except via text in a sub-menu. Same animations across the board, and mostly swapped palettes. There's something like 40 in the game. Holy f***, dude. I don't get it. Like, say I'm an Einherjar, right? You pull my axe out of the ground so you can put me in your party, and you get a text pop-up that says, KBash lived from 1912 to 3072 and died of Penis-Hort disease. And that's that. Admittedly, you can't get them all in a single run. Certain weapons will have multiple potential Einherjar inside of them, but only give out one from the pool at random. So yes, there's some level of personal pride you can get out of being gifted your squad via fate or something. It just doesn't even approach what the first game did, and I get it. I guarantee you there was zero budget or dev time left for fleshing out a whole new cast of dudes, especially when they didn't create tons of original assets for the different Einherjar. Still a downgrade though. I mean, with the number of main party members in your squad at any given time, you're barely incentivized to use the Einherjar except to farm their souls for mechanical benefit. What the fuck? Combat's where the game really shines. The old setup was fine. It functioned. It was fun to set up combos with your main squad once you knew how they worked together. But once you had it down, that was it. Really. VP2's system is blown wide open. You can still choose to engage or ignore combat at will, but once the game's on, your options expand tenfold. I called it real-time, but that's somewhat misleading. Basically, your party and your opponents spawn into 3D space. You can move at will, but if you do, your opponents will move as well. You can dash around, and that ends up being super important because the goal is to move in range and pummel enemies to death while minimizing incoming damage. It's how you break the effective movement economy of the game. It's hard to actively avoid enemy attacks without dashing around because enemies are always moving forward, and they have these huge threatened spaces they show with MMO-like indicators. Stand in one and get whacked. Those are some hefty ranges, bro. I see you're training for Sam Show. Nice. So the goal becomes zipping through red spaces and behind enemies to initiate attacks. After you've started the beatdown, it's really not much different than before, only attacks are more likely to connect on average than the first game. Not always, but they cleaned up most of the hitbox jank. You've got most of the same options. Mages can cast spells from a menu, you can make use of items. If you want to get tactical, you can split the party. Try not to leave your ass exposed, i.e. the one party member who can't get with the program and always trails just far enough behind to get smacked, and you'll be fine. And the basic goal hasn't changed. You're still a 4-person party with each member affixed to a button. You can customize your setup to maximize the number of hits you pull to fill up the gauge to drop a fat special attack on the enemy.
Now is the time. Finishing strike.
Damn, that's hardcore, bro! In a game that's lacking some of the original's charm, it's nice to see ridiculous, over-the-top, named special attacks. I have my own special move, too. 7th Sealed Sword Art, behold, 1,000 Zentetsuken severing the 1,000 threads of fate! So the game's fun and frantic. The only real issue is how much combat you actually do. I frequently, more than frequently, I constantly went out to grind between story dungeons because I genuinely felt like I had no choice. Even if bosses aren't out of your level range, equipment and abilities really carry the difficulty, and a lot of good equipment is crafted specifically by grinding up a bunch of base materials from enemies to hand over to a merchant in a needlessly strange menu system, but ignore that, so you're rewarded for screwing around and faffing about, killing everything, laying waste to the monsters. I'm sure someone below is writing up a complaint on how you can abuse mechanics to scrape by with minimal grinding, and I gotta tell you, the good news is there's more than one avenue for grinding up power, either via sealstone setups, or good equipment, or abilities, or actually bothering to become a tactical master, but it's not the kind of game I'd sell to most people. You know, you can pick up Persona or Xenoblade, and for the most part, they work out of the box. The game's fishing for that type of fan, though, someone who'll play for long hours and get invested. And we know that because they gate Einherjar acquisition with chance, completionists absolutely shaking, because the game allows you to start a New Game Plus and keep your recruits, and allows you to power up to obscene levels and stomp all over the game if you think it's fun. Anyone else, your mileage may vary. Play co-op with your crush, that's I can think of worse state nights. On that note, one of the things I actually didn't super love about the original was losing Einherjar. You always had to send up at least one, and sometimes two, if you wanted the normal ending. It's not truly painful. You've always got extras, and it adds extra tension or drama chapter by chapter. Here, you can set Einherjar free for items and experience orbs, and that's about it. No character updates on the war in Valhalla, nothing but the items to remember them by. It's a system whose shell is intact, but stripped of paint entirely. I really have to stress that VP1 is weird and interesting. 2, whether due to dev constraints or even narrative changes, isn't able to embody the totality of what its predecessor was. I caught a few apoplectic takes on Valkyrie Elysium comparing it to 2, but even 2 doesn't really burn like the original. The last major gameplay change is skills. In the past, you'd enter a submenu and plug points into skills for your dudes. Simple once you got the gist. In 2, I'm saying a lot of into today. In number 2, you wear equipment and try to match up the associated runes by color and shape that each piece of equipment brings to the grid to unlock passive skills that must be trained via combat to actually unlock, like FFTA or something. And you've got a limited set of skill points, so it's hard to get properly set up until the late game. A lot of reviewers at the time found this stuff needlessly arcane because it is. Like, on one hand, sure, I'm digging around in the character's skill mines and finding trash or treasure, but it's fine. I'm planning to spend 70 hours here. On the other, you have no real way of knowing how to get good skills, and most aren't incredibly clear about their purpose or value. Skill acquisition is annoying and time-intensive instead of instant and deliberate. I guess you could spin it as exploratory and engaging, like excavation or something. Nuance! I should mention bosses before moving on. The real tests of skill are always going to be the boss enemies, yeah? And like you'd expect, a lot of them are tightly designed, require specific in-combat actions to defeat, or gate players via specific means. One boss makes you run around the arena, breaking statues to open him up to damage. One boss does enormous attacks and asks the player to hug ass the whole fight, or risk getting whomped. One fight will just straight up kill your party 100-0, unless you did your seal stone setup right, or equipped fire resistance gear. A lot of the fights are annoying like that, but you have to give them props, I guess. Anything less, and it'd be a game of rolling in with your favored setup and unloading with no thought or effort or planning. FFTA again. I just wish games like this, that make use of annoying gimmicks to gate progression, at least cued players in beforehand. Like had some means of gathering information prior. Just like in D&D, VP2, walk in unprepared, expect to die. But in D&D, at least, you can usually scout or fact find a little. So in case it wasn't obvious, VP2 gave me some crazy sequel shock after a few hours. It's truly weird to play something as tight and considered as Valkyrie Profile, then watch its sequel balloon out after pounding 300 cheesecakes. What is this game? Believe it or not, in a way, I think it's a smart direction to go, even if the actual product diverges radically from the origin point. Even if I'm not having fun. Smart because all of these things pad the play out. I've talked about this before, but it effectively creates an invested core fanbase. The amount of game here is monumental, especially factoring in endgame stuff and ideal build potential. Valkyrie Profile was always a weaselly number nerd game. It's begging to be broken, and VP2 lets you go feral with it. And hey, there was no way VP2 was gonna be VP1 again, in a time where, if you can remember it, people looked down on sprited games as a generation behind the times. Expanding the IP would probably only be good. So, Triace said enough with the character vignettes and moments. It's time to make a recognizable JRPG. A linear, low variance, specifically Valkyrie Profile story. All the fans are waiting to hear Brahms and Lazard's deal, so recap time. The Valkyrie Silmeria inhabits Princess Alicia's body. Pris tries to stop them but fails and vows to hunt them down. Tension established. Alicia recruits a guide with Silmeria's help, and Silmeria summons Dylan the Einherjar later on, establishing most of the party. Dylan is ancient and self-serious, a fervid servant of Alicia's kingdom and Silmeria. Rufus is distrustful and discerns Silmeria's identity, but ultimately chooses to assist because she doesn't serve the gods. The party finds out that Alicia's father, the king of Dept, is is up to some funny basement antics with his court mages, and while escaping are stopped by Hrist, who turns out to be weaker than Rufus and Dylan combined, I guess. And when they're eventually surrounded, Lizard Valeth himself, the young apprentice to the mages and morbid from the first game, teleports the party away. The game turns into a hunt for the Dragon Orb, one of the extremely important MacGuffins from the first game, to thwart the king's occult villainy. This involves hunting for the thing and meeting up with Guts, Arngrim himself, and another mercenary named Leone. I like that the game gives away her identity immediately with these ridiculously overplayed staring shots. The story ultimately runs into the Vagrant story problem. That is, having interesting scenes, though much fewer in VP2's case, sprinkled between long segments of boring gameplay. The good news is, they went nuts with some of these. They're long and protracted enough that characters get all kinds of decent scenes together. It really feels like the game's gunning for just as good as Final Fantasy, guys, and only really falls short in the character category. Like Alicia, Rufus, Dylan, Lizard, I don't know, at least one of these is supposed to be a charisma factory, but they don't feel particularly lovable, you know? Lizard actually ends up being the most lovable the most often, as disgusting as that is, because he's constantly reassuring the party and acting level-headed in the face of danger, always providing a hopeful answer. If anything, the party's all tension. What's going to happen with Alicia and Silmeria? Who's Dylan supposed to be? Like, why is this ancient knight being given screen time alongside, like, Arngrim and others? What's Rufus's deal? Will Hrist smother Alicia in the night? When's Lizard going evil? That's a big one. Coming off the first game, we know Lizard's capable of murder and general sociopathy. I care more about the cast's origins and issues than about their interactions. We get another tense scene where it's revealed that Rufus is a half-elf and therefore a vessel for Odin, so Odin could technically take his body anytime if he wanted. Adds a little anti-deity spice to the proceedings, a little doom. We like the doom. A lot of interpersonal bits between Leone and Alicia dot the middle section, some of them being pretty warm. Decent stuff, accepting the fact that the game frequently shows Lizard watching Leone, and even spoiling early that she's for sure a Valkyrie, being able to communicate with the dead, so thanks for leaving me absolutely nothing to speculate about. Leone betrays the party once they find the orb, mortally wounds Arngrim, and takes him as an Einherjar by force. Guys, y'all really said, yo, fuck Guts. You get Dylan. Do I look like I'm trying to team up to fight the gods with a man named Dylan? From here, the game ramps up the stakes. Odin's going to war with the Pen for being anti-god and pro-undead, I guess. The party rolls up looking for trouble. Damn! Nice catch! Unfortunately, Alicia watches her dad get the sloppy choppy via the guillotine, and while I'm a guillotine enthusiast myself, this act, in fact, serves to reinforce the status quo between humans and gods, so it does not qualify as praxis. This all culminates in a big scene where the Valkyries clash. The undead mage trio skirt around the battle, setting something up, and Lizard casually observes, so you know something's gonna happen. So during the catfight, the mages try to use a special spell to separate the souls of the Valkyries from their vessels, which is bad. Then Dylan reveals that he isn't Dylan, but actually the Lord of the Undead, Brahms, and says it's his turn to save Alicia. Then Freya, the goddess Freya, warps into position to assassinate Brahms because he's a high-value Odin enemy, at which point Lizard casts his own spell and mucks literally everything up. Brahms is captured by Freya, Odin wants to let Midgard perish, Alicia and Rufus are left alone, morale hits rock bottom. What was any of that, and what do we do now? Basically, Rufus and Alicia become best BBs and quash friends and screw around the forest. Backtracking more than necessary, I might add, and doing a lot of PDA stuff, but thankfully they're alone for most of it. Alicia takes ghoul powder and doesn't end up like VP1 Yolanda. Figure that out. Climbing Yggdrasil, they confront Odin, get whomped, Lizard shows up, oops, he stole Silmeria's soul, so he's Mega Lizard actually. Then he whomps Odin and Freya, transfers Odin's soul into Rufus by force, displacing Rufus's soul, takes the divine spear Gungnir for himself, Freya escapes, Lizard's the new villain, Alicia... I'm overheating here, bro. Alicia manages to materialize Rufus the same as an Einherjar using his ring as a focus. The face when your boyfriend's a ring. Stop touching yourselves. I know at least 2 of you are into that. I do like that the party ends up fighting Freya because she's a bigot, just won't negotiate with humans or something, so Hrist steps up and isn't pure lawful evil for a second. Like, actually thinks for herself for once. Good. Then Lenneth, creator goddess from the first game, appears before the party, having traveled beyond time and space to right the wrongs of the past. She reveals that Lazard didn't even come from this time, but her own time via a time machine. So this got really crazy, huh? I have to give this some props. Like, it goes off the rails pretty hard, shoots past the scope you'd expect, but it's got all these really beautifully rendered cutscenes and starts roping in familiar elements for fans. It's really trying to be a foundational, celebratory work for the series. I mean, you're loaded up with Arngrim, Brahms, Christ, Lenneth, eventually Silmeria again. You squat up, Alicia sacrifices herself to birth a super Valkyrie born of their combined souls, and Giga Creep Lazard gets stuffed by the 30-foot slants. Was the story any good? It's hard to say, but let's go piece by piece. The characters are okay. I can see liking them even more when you're younger. Alicia's cute, Rufus is kind of funny. Lazard's not awful for most of the game, they're fine. Some of the scenes are sweet, especially playing up Alicia's burden as a mortal forced to carry the weight of a godly being. Alicia's outcast status helps her bond with Rufus in a meaningful way, and even makes Lazard's presence sensical. The game's context is interesting. Lazard may be a villain, but he can play the hero temporarily in a party actively working against the gods for sympathetic reasons. Otherwise, the thing gets a little heavy with nouns and premises. Like every inexplicable event has an explanation, it feels like, but that explanation was conjured on the spot. It's pretty common with metaphysical phenomena in fiction, so we simply nod and say, okay. Arguably, it could have hit a little harder with the versus God thing going on, if the party weren't already half superhuman and eventually all the Valkyries and the Lord of the Undead as well. I don't feel the outcast thing works as well when you're all the collected other superpowers, you know? So it works best as a togetherness story, fighting for each other at the end of the world. There had to be loads of people saying VP2 is good, but it isn't a good Valkyrie Profile game on release. And while I feel it, I really do. I'm not gonna dog the thing for being different. I got my Valkyrie Profile, and I can play it whenever. While some stuff is disappointing, it feels like a series of necessary development sacrifices, the result of pushing for a different, highly produced vision. 2 is deeply ambitious, very cool, heartbreakingly beautiful, and appropriately quaint, and sweet in its storytelling. It's not about the failures of mankind in the face of stagnation and extinction, but rather about fighting for yourself and others for a future you can believe in, casting off the shackles of oppressors. It's an old song, but if it keeps getting sung, it must be worth the time. Valkyrie Profile, famous JRPG franchise. Fine. I'll just talk to myself. The first entry is a certified hood classic, violent, technical, cropped, and deliberate. It featured the Valkyrie Lenneth, one of a trio of Valkyries, tasked with saving the world in the face of Ragnarok. The sequel's a late bloomer, but well-loved. It's puffy and complex, even compared to the original, but meaningfully built on the play established in the first. The player controls a mortal possessed by Silmeria, the youngest and most rebellious Valkyrie, in a quest to topple Odin himself. Enter Covenant of the Plume, the lone DS title. Well, that's the last of the classic titles. This must be it. Valkyrie Profile 3, featuring the third sister, Hrist. What are you, stupid? Are you dumb? Covenant of the Plume, which I'll be shortening to COOM, apologies, is an SRPG, which might seem strange at a glance, but Valkyrie Profile was always strategic and somewhat technical. Turns out that's not by mistake. According to this 99 dev interview, the original VP title almost ended up as an SRPG itself. That's fascinating considering COOM. The game's not your average genre copycat, not even close, and more accurately resembles a regular Valkyrie Profile game if you had to wander through a tactical grid to start combat. It's not an exploration of that original Valkyrie Profile strategy concept, it's a compromise with what the game became. That's really interesting! So, let us, you and I, become Covenant of the Plume enjoyers. Coomers, some say. COOM's a little different for a VP game, and it might as well be a spin-off, but since it's one of 3 extant games with that logo, and Lenneth shows up, I guess we're giving it a pass. Regardless, there are no playable Valkyries Valkyries, in the main game anyway. No, you get Wilfred. Hope you like Wilfred. Buddy Boy's a white mop swordy edgelordian, okay? VP was always dark, and arguably 1 is still darker and less sophomoric, but Coom here really brings the bleeding edge. The Valkyrie. She took my father away from me, all the way to Valhalla. She's pure evil, and I won't stop until my howling blade bathes in Valkyrie blood. Dude, holy shit. Imagine your dad dies and is recognized as a hero by the closest thing to an arbiter of justice in the world, and gets to feast in Valhalla for all time. Would you have preferred he roast for all eternity? I can understand a little. His father's death shattered his mother's mind, and he's thrust into the workforce, or the mercenary world, to make ends meet. Life sucks and then you die. Thankfully, Wilfred brought a friend, this happy little sunspot, Ansel. Be a real shame if the last single pillar of your support network died tragically in a "I killed my best friend during a demon attack by empowering him with a cursed feather I found to ensure our survival" moment. But what are the chances of that? And so, Wilfred runs away from the mercenary company, his friend's blood on his hands, to exact vengeance on Lenneth. Strap the in for this one. Everything seems pretty average, or at least up front. You click locations on a map, read some dialogue, stock up at the shop, and run through missions. There's a pile of side quests, like most SRPGs, but let's ignore that. The first thing you gotta know is that Coom is made to be played multiple times, like the other Valkyrie Profile games. It wants you getting the bad ending, and starting over with your acquired knowledge and power. Levels and skills and all of that carry over. It's extremely easy to walk into impossibly difficult scenarios, overwhelming resistance from enemies, all of that bad stuff that normally makes players quit. It's not balanced for a newcomer or even longtime genre fans to just roll in expecting to win every fight with mechanical skill. But that sounds terrible! Yes, except that little thing Wilfred did to his best friend in the intro is the expectation. If you walk in like it's Fire Emblem, trying to reset every time someone dies, you're gonna close the game and never come back. Coom wants you killing your friends. I'm gonna say that again. Coom wants you killing your friends. Bleeding fucking edge, dude, yes! That's not exactly accurate. It's more that you'll be forced to draw on that mechanic if you want to progress at all. For now, let's talk basics. Coom kinda schmoovin' though? Unlike your traditional FFTs or Vandal Hearts, I guess, Coom's not about individually powerful units. You still want them powering up as much as possible, but the goal in basically any battle is to move your squad into position, surround an enemy, and mug them to death. Just really let them have it. Could the director be a fellow Yggdra Union fan?
Oh my god! The commander's been shot in the eye!
And of course, the point, like all of Valkyrie Profile combat, is to build up points to dump on special attacks. Okay, but that is a human being doing that. These aren't Einherjar. These aren't the souls of the dead empowered by the Valkyrie. These are men. There's something really funny about these commoners rolling onto the battlefield in a time of war and strife and peasant uprisings just to drop sick anime schmoves on anyone they meet.
We are gathered here today to mourn the death of John Johnston, who died on the battlefield of Omega Sword Art Rising Phoenix Desperado Strike.
Aside from basic attacks, which like any VP game are reorderable in a menu, you want to be powering up with passive traits and unlocking special abilities to increase your move distance. Lots of cool utility stuff, plus the ability to draw aggro. Why is the draw aggro ability stuck in a game like this? This genre loves directional attacks, breaking enemy formations, protecting squishier, high-damage units. Why is it stuck in the Valkyrie Profile spin-off game? No, it's fine. I'll be staring at walls for a while. Now, I've been trying to get into this thing, but Coom's a little strained. It's edging up to the greats, but not quite getting there. Why is that? Well, the stages are mostly varied with little walls and obstacles. Elevation isn't super important, but it gets used for choke points on occasion. The problem is when the CPU doesn't do anything or can't attack, and you can barely attack, and you're just trying to push through a roadblock, and the game goes from fast and frenetic to annoying in a blink. You could probably plan around moments like this if Coom were an average SRPG, but there aren't any generic units to speak of. Okay, I can't load up on archers. It's a Valkyrie Profile game. Every character has a profile, and most of them are locked into melee combat. And that's fun because the stages, though varied, are usually really big. Like really, really big, or full of hazards, or both large and full of movement impeding snow. So many missions are absolute crawls, ridiculous slogs through nonsense so you can pile on and beat ass, and that'd be doable. I can see the designer vision, make him trudge through hell, so when they open a can on the last dude standing, it'll feel amazing. Is what I would say if I were imagining how this game feels instead of experiencing how it actually feels in real time. You know, if you had to travel in FFT, for example, that was usually a design consideration. Arrows, elevation, spells, a challenge. Coom doesn't feel very designed at times. And I wasn't kidding about unwinnable scenarios. Unless you're willing to use the Plume to kill your friends, some of these missions are, played straight, legitimately RNG based. This one NPC will walk directly into her death, constantly, unless you abuse skills you likely won't have, or you use the Plume. Now, FFT does this too. Glass houses. I hear you, but to be fair, it happens at least twice in Coom. But fine, it's a different game, doing its own thing. And the design isn't anti-fun all of the time. Sometimes it's extremely funny. What's with the Plume? Using it ensures a unit will die at the end of a mission, but it also powers up that unit to truly godly power levels, making them superhuman. You can practically solo levels using it. I think that's just hilarious from a design standpoint. Like, first and foremost, this is a tactical game, but if you don't want to engage with those tactics, or can't because the design is too sharp for your first run of the game, well, just burn up one of your friend's souls. Had a heartfelt moment or saved their life? Who cares? They're just tools at your disposal! Like, you're made to do this, and encouraged to if you want to see every ending. Especially the good ending. I'm thinking that might be why the game ain't all that popular. Now remember, Coom is very dark. Wilfred is a broody boy, so you're not just trying to defeat your enemies, you have to drop the base, rack up the dam, overkill them into oblivion, and skull their corpses. God. Sorry, I'm trying to do a thing. Just you. You don't just want to win, you need to deal excessive damage. Overkill enemies, which makes sense. Valkyrie Profile was always about stacking hella combos and dropping fat specials. It's a great thematic way to work with pre-established mechanics, alongside a newfound narrative conceit. But you do this to gain sin points. Sin points. Mind-blowing. Once you're the sinningest boy, the person who gave you the Plume, Hell, the Queen of Niflheim, the underworld, or at least Hell's confidant anyway, will give you little gifts. Now, isn't that precious? Valkyrie Profile games always have multiple endings, and that all ties directly into Plume usage. If you're on a fresh save, you're getting the bad ending, barring use of a guide or other knowledge. Medium ending at best. This is where the ending chart comes in handy. Basically, Coom is split into 3 major routes that determine what characters you encounter and recruit at all. And it's not a big number. That first run squad is sparse. You'll be able to choose at the first diverging path, which will lead into an easy, normal, or hard fight, with literally zero indication, by the way. But after that battle, you're on a train track that branches based on Plume usage. You can actually game over by consuming all of your party members and be forced to restart your playthrough. It's wild. That sounds fine and all, but 2 playthroughs is something like a 30-hour commitment, and the game's not overly beautiful or enjoyable enough to justify it for most people. The character designs are neat. Some of their personalities are really compelling. I love Gwendol here because he's basically the most jaded, horrible man on the planet.
I can't with this game. Look at that slide!
One thing Coom does surprisingly well is writing. I don't think the story itself, a flawed and fairly strained quest for revenge on a lesser deity literally everyone accepts as good just because life sucks and poverty is a state of being. I don't think that works overly well. We all know Wilfred's gonna get his shit together eventually and turn his blade on Hell, the real antagonist from the intro. But the actual writing is like PSP FFT competent, that emulated Shakespeare stuff that's challenging for some people, but engrossing for others. Having read enough Billy Shakes in my time, I find it competent, and sometimes really impressive, actually emotive. It does more for the game than the visuals and the gameplay, I'd say. And sometimes it carries over to the cutscenes as well. I didn't really groove with the second game's mellower tone. I mean, it's aesthetic, but there's very little edge to VP2. It's a way more pillowy narrative than you'd expect coming off the first entry, but Covenant came out swinging. This game's vile, cruel, sad, I live, love, laugh this stuff, dude. Profound human misery. We stand. Part of me wishes I could recommend this more. I mean, the credentials are inarguable. If you want to do a lot of stuff for a long time, power up over playthroughs, and basically take your little human goon squad to godly levels, sure, that's all there, with plenty of endings and side quests and things to do. It's a surprising amount of game for its size, and like any Valkyrie Profile title, there's a bonus Seraphic Gate mode where you can select your squad and challenge the sick and twisted designers who masterminded it. The real conflict I'm having is over its place in the Valkyrie Profile lineage. On one hand, yo, video games! On the other, I don't know if it's good enough. So what does Plume do to earn its place? It emulates the other VP games in all kinds of ways: the aesthetics, the item names, the special attacks, and the fundamentals of combo combat. It isn't trying to be wildly different, just branch out slightly. I mean, the real functional difference is making your characters walk. You know, adding 3D space. I have a feeling longtime fans might be turned off by the handheldness of the game. It's not this premium main console piece, it's a side thing. And it's not written so well that it's life-changing, so really, what's the draw? Well, arguably, and only if you're interested in the lineage of the games, Plume has a greater narrative relevance to the original than the sequel. That first PS1 game was all about selling a broken, tired world on the brink of total collapse, and it dramatized the lives of mortals at the expense of the protagonist's screen time. That's a pretty powerful concept, and 2 didn't really build on it. It diverged and made basically everything about the protag and her friend group, and fleshes out the world. Plume picks up that old thread again with a mortal main character, a wide array of nobles and commoners, and it works pretty damn well as a war story, something that feels natural for Valkyrie Profile because war threads its DNA. But it goes beyond that. Wilfred isn't a fantastic protagonist, not really, but he is subversive. He's melancholy, brooding, miserable, edgy, yes, but way more fun than early game Lenneth, way more interesting than Alicia for the most part, if only because he has the agency to do bad things. And he's directly looped into the conflict, not just the quest for revenge against Lenneth, but the human conflicts the games often gloss for their relative irrelevance to the gods. I wasn't always impressed, but some of the scenes are memorable, compelling drama. I will say that Plume fumbles the bag at times. Sure, Wilfred will act on occasion, but way too often he's stuck, standing stock still while 2 other characters kill each other, or go through trauma and he's there, 3 feet away, like... As for the endings, spoilers by the way if you care, the early ending has Freya flying down to Midgard and bopping you on the head. The bad ending, as you'd expect, involves a battle with Lenneth, but Wilfred ultimately fails to kill her soul, and Hel exacts the price of her aid by taking Wilfred to Niflheim. Everything was for nothing. You were a pawn. It sucks that the player should see this ending coming from the intro, but can't meaningfully avoid it on a first play. Kinda shoots the game in the foot, capping enjoyment like that. In the normal ending, Wilfred's dad confronts him because he's an Einherjar in Lenneth's service, and he ultimately sacrifices himself to save Will from eternal suffering in hell. Okay, not happy, decidedly miserable, but Will learns something. We witness a horrible tragedy. Not bad! The good ending, the hardest ending to get, naturally involves Will battling with a lesser deity to save his soul and set the world right. These are all kind of limp by comparison. Lenneth literally ascends to God of Creation status in 1, and Alicia becomes the strongest being in the universe at one point. Will's just the guy with a magic feather and anime moves. It tries to cap off the political B-plot that runs through the game, which is easily the more compelling story, but it ultimately steps aside so Will, who's deeply embroiled in all of it, can cleanly and safely extricate himself from the good stuff to do the stuff the plot demands. In that sense, the ending doesn't really matter. The real drama of lives lived in Midgard is always unfolding and wraps before the final battle. Will's fate is a footnote in a much grander painting ultimately left neglected. But Plume still takes time to show how his life, and the lives of his mother and sister pan out after the quest. It's the kind of story that feels genuinely like it could have used a little less direct godly presence and more guidance from unseen forces. It could have been really compelling in a mysterious way that wasn't so definitive with its good and evil axes. A human story about fate and how the very powers Will seeks to destroy aid him in unseen ways until the truth is cryptically revealed. But now I'm writing fanfiction about a game that doesn't exist. I guess that means Covenant actually got me a little, huh? In the end, Coom lacks the raw quality of 1 and the scope of 2, but it's a game that goes in a couple of tiny squares and works. What more can you ask for? If you boil down Valkyrie Profile to its base elements, I mean, really got at the heart of the series, you'd probably find things like hope for humanity, struggling against fate, and strength in cooperation. These concepts are at the core of many JRPGs. The Valkyrie, the world, the mythical props and pieces are dressing. These games and stories aren't particularly faithful to their source material. They could happen in any setting, so long as deities are ruling over people. Yeah, I said it. The Norse stuff doesn't make a lick of difference. The snow's a vibe, though. Gotta admit, elsewise, VP games have been mechanically complex, shaking up genre labels and assumptions. So, when Valkyrie Elysium was announced, critically not using the Profile name, featuring a character that fans assumed was longtime character Hrist,
but different.
And all in a totally action framework. Well, let's just say fans took it pretty well.
This game is garbage!
Holy sh**. But it's a really interesting discussion to root around in regardless, because Elysium here is all kinds of messy. This game's out here emitting pheromones, bro. You either find it enthralling, or you're thinking it's kinda stinky, and frankly, I'm not calling either reaction invalid. It's a weird-ass game. This isn't gonna be a needlessly dramatic, "This is the greatest betrayal for Valkyrie Profile fans," or "This is the game that changed my life." It's none of those things. Well, let's start mashing square and maybe we can cut a figure through play. Valkyrie Elysium is not a tri-ace game, but a project handed down from Square to relatively young developers Soleil, who've done some things. It's clearly a low-budget cash-in on nostalgia, or an attempt to bring the Valkyrie Profile IP into the 21st century. That's a pretty tight rope to walk because old fans are always going to be pissed with any shift in direction. And the reality is, Valkyrie Profile isn't a big moneymaker. Tri-Ace's major franchise, Star Ocean, historically outsold Valkyrie Profile, even the weird ones.
Edge? Miracle? What do you think you're doing?
And the series more or less withered away, always doing good, but never landing household name status. I'd say fans are lucky to have what they do. Those classics are still around, still great, and now there's an action VP game. I mean, I don't know if you've seen my channel before, but I'm interested. So Soleil went ahead and changed up the dressing, same fundamentals, different flavor, and now it's all the same,
but different.
Thousand Island to Ranch. You're still a Valkyrie in service to Odin, and you're really angry about it. Yes, Odin looks like the evilest person in the whole universe, but you're gonna have to ignore that. Naturally, there are humans. You're joined on your quest to save the world from the impending apocalypse by such characters as Daddy Orlando Bloom. This person, the woke agenda, and a witch lesbiab? I know I'm taking the piss here, but you gotta give Elysium points for pissing off all the right people. Elysium leaves a lot of details out, not unlike the other games. You're a Valkyrie, a lesser deity whose sole purpose is to serve Odin. He wants you containing threats to his power, so you do. I have a lot of mixed feelings, so forgive me for this, but I'm gonna start with the realistic, rough intro experience and grow this take into something resembling admiration. Trust me on this. While I prematurely wet myself over the action game framing, Elysium doesn't do much to sell itself. I can't actually recommend this to people, at full price. You'll hit the tutorial, get a grip on slashing, guarding, dodging, summoning allies in combat, solving environmental puzzles, and platforming. Then the game yanks all your stuff away and leaves you wondering when it gets fun again. You'll walk through a beautiful but barren hub zone, enter a level, and think, okay, this seriously released at full retail? Summoning allies is a huge part of the combat, enormous part, big part, gigantic part of the combat, and it takes a good while to get one, let alone the full roster. The early levels are slogs because of it. You're slashing away with your clumsy avatar on schmeedy health sacks, and it just ain't all that enticing. Maybe they want to sell the experience slowly because it's an old JRPG IP, and they're not sure if fans are up and up on action game mechanics. Okay, but counterpoint, Bayonetta and DMC simply do not care. That's what easy mode's for. Maybe they want to tell a winding tale of character growth that requires meeting new characters, your summonable allies, to, really hammer home the weight of being alone. This is the likely answer, but if it's going to be an issue, why not have proxy summonable guys, like gray faceless puppets or something? Keep the integrity of the combat intact for the full game. If you haven't tried the thing, you might be wondering why I'm making a thing out of this, but games live and die on first impressions. Most people don't finish games or give them appropriate playtime, and if the first impression is, well, this kind of sucks, the poor reception can't come as a shock. The real thing pinning this crummy situation down is the actual heft of the combat. Attacks are weighty, incredibly so, and it's accomplished by tacking long recovery frames to any given attack, a fair amount of hit stun, and screen shake. Oh, and that really important action game thing, the C word! You can't meaningfully cancel out of attacks like other action game masterclasses. I mean, sure, you can shave some recovery time off of attacks by holding guard, but you're never truly canceling out. In fact, the only true cancels involve jump, which is not as good as it sounds, and it's necessary for the game's aerial juggles anyway, and canceling with the tether. You can pull yourself to any enemy on screen with a tap, but since it's accompanied by a lengthy animation, it's not a great cancel tool either. So the game is slow, heavy, mechanically heavy. Probably the most fitting game for the clunky label I've ever played. You will not be schmooving. You will not be hitting the gritty. This is a deliberate experience, but it's still couched in the action game lineage. It still wants you to perfect parry attacks. It wants you racking up combos, juggling enemies where possible. It's scoring you for your combat performance. Even after picking up the first two guys, combat doesn't fully round out until you've got a bunch of spells unlocked for utility, got your full roster, and plug points all the way down all three skill trees. It's definitely a fun and frantic system, but you never know at first blush. Valkyrie Elysium's bosses aren't terrible. I have nothing really to say about them though, because they're traditional action game fare. You run, you hit, and you try to dodge your best, but the problem is you have these amazingly slow recovery times and really bad cancel ability, so you can only ever commit to a couple attacks safely. They use a lot of threatened spaces that they mark on the ground. The game's fine overall, except the intent is to break them by overcharging them with too much of the element they're weak to, and then wailing. So this makes them action RPG bosses as opposed to normal action game enemies. You have to inflict a status element, stun, in order to truly schmoove on them. I really can't get over how terrible the weapons are in this game. The fact that the main sword is the best, whatever. I played with the long sword through a couple of Dark Souls games, fine. But handing the player a fast rapier sold in-game as the fast weapon and having its frames barely different, not in any way meaningfully different from the default weapon, is embarrassing. Add to that the slow two-hander, which is too slow to use in a game that will absolutely kill you in 2 seconds on any difficulty above hard, and you've got a recipe for never bothering with any kind of additional weapon at all. At least the dual spear is cool, but I'm saving the real combat breakdown for later. So let's talk everything else. The early Valkyrie Profile games sold tired, collapsing worlds with a lot of visual signifiers, muted palettes and wary peasants and open spaces. The grandeur of the world was obvious, but it was a joyless grandeur. Stoic, I guess. Now I know the budget is $3, but man, the worlds are empty. Truly barren in that demo Unity game way. Like, they're done up pretty enough, and this is a world on the brink of an apocalyptic event, which is why you're mostly meeting souls, and like one single person. Wait. Zoomer. You really don't do much of anything in the world except move, poke around, and fight. The devs added a ton of little blurb-producing plants that contextualize the humans who lived in any given area, dropping interesting story tidbits, or crap, it varies, and these cryptic, unreadable ones as well that are well hidden in each area. You need to collect them all before seeing the ending to get the true ending. You are gonna miss at least 3 of these. Elysium would be incredibly short if not for 3 major roadblocks: collectibles like the true ending plants, character progression in general, and combat. Creatures litter the world, and there's no real choice to run. You're boxed in and stopped frequently. And that's fine, it's a combat-centric game. You're supposed to want to fight, but there's a limit. I don't think I ever felt genuine exhaustion playing Bayonetta. A few times with God of War and late-game DMC5, for example, but they really throw combat after combat at you until it's offensive. You know, if more people played stuff like this and the new Gungrave, they'd understand why Bayo 3 really ain't all that bad. Character progression is the real trap. Elysium throws out a few side quests, which are actually miniature missions. You need to exit to the world map and play them out independent of story missions, which only serves to tack on the hours, and for what exactly? Health and resource bar upgrades. Goody. I mean, occasionally you can pull an extra weapon type from the odd quest, but there aren't many, and they're not great. The default sword is tragically the best weapon in the game. There's no need to expand your arsenal. You definitely don't need any of the bar upgrades to win on normal either. Possibly the worst issue here is the double level problem. You're often made to run through a pretty but boring level to its conclusion with endless HUD clutter, I might add. Get your grade, get your cutscene, and the next chapter is a rerun of the entire level to another objective. Guys, I know the budget's tight. I know COVID the dev cycle. I know you probably have a time limit to hit. But guys! And while the chapters are unique, simply doubling up on game time with more inane battles to run through, I mean, I don't want to call it soulless, but anything good and creative and joyful was marched out to die between the approval date and any of the factors I just listed. Might as well get the gamer gripes out. The voice acting is fine, if a little flat. Very few people give stellar performances, but it's just that kind of game, muted and grim and apocalyptic. What you gonna do? The personalities on the screen aren't incredible either. Silmeria took a back seat to Alicia, and Lenneth was a robot too, but her conviction was loud, and her story was almost entirely set aside for a series of gripping mini-dramas. Elysium tries, and fumbles, focuses in on the main 5, and never really sells it. It's really hard to relate with a protag who's always robotic about everything on screen. It's hard to get into characters whose greatest creative spark comes from their concept art, whose backstories are delivered purely in text. It's hard to get into the visual design when nothing is explicitly pulling you in. And the combat for the same reason. There's literally an execution you unlock that triggers at like 20%, and they had to have included it because they knew it'd be boring and miserable having to chunk down every last guy to every last hit point. All of the side quest stuff is annoying and superfluous, and I'm trying here, man, but like most of the game's elements, from empty environments to truly heavy combat to the sub-personality protagonist, narrative justifications exist. All of these make sense in context. Consideration and artistry do, in fact, inform the work. Of course combat is heavy. It's angling for an incredible struggle with medieval brutes and their patron deity at the end of the world. Of course the Valkyrie is boring and focused on missions. Serving Odin is literally all she knows. It's an incredibly slow burn for an action game, but it's possible to see the good. So, advanced combat. VP games are known for their relative complexity, nerdy number shuffling, etc. Elysium lets players tweak all kinds of things: which weapons to use and what gems to slot into weapons for various benefits, which skills to upgrade even if those choices level out over time on normal mode. You can unlock new moves for your Einherjar by doing character-specific side quests. On one hand, almost none of this actually matters. You can keep everything default until the end of the game and slot in the percent damage increase gem on whatever weapon, but the option to customize is important, especially in a difficulty-focused action game. You're intended to challenge new heights and gain new appreciation for the system as you go. Normal mode sucks because nothing about normal is compelling. You roll into battle and dump everything you can. Combat becomes much more about keeping up momentum than being intelligent because the only threat to your life bar is not pinning down enemies hard enough. It's a very mashy experience and draining to to play. But ticking the thing up past normal introduces limitations. Suddenly, you can't plug in every single skill point and overpower your character. You have to make decisions. Do you want the upgraded execution cutoff perk or better parries? I don't know. Figure it out. Setting aside the joy of higher difficulties, though they help because of the increased threat, the real quality of Valkyrie Elysium gameplay is found near the end. When you've got all your tools, when you've got your little preferred spell setup on hotkey, combat revolves around efficiently dispatching single enemies in a swarm. Every enemy has an element, each Einherjar companion has an element, and sending them out charges your own weapon with their element. They attack on their own and do well enough. You're given the tools to obliterate basically every enemy in the game, minus a handful whose elements don't correspond with your Einherjar. So you send them out, but that's not enough. You have to make intelligent choices about what weapon to use, when to swap elements, when to cast different spells, whether to cast damage or cast to heal because your casting is limited to a meter that refills by dealing damage, if you should use the invincibility garnered via spell casting to become invincible to dodge an attack. And that's all before getting to actual combat mechanics. Parrying is incredibly useful, but fairly hard to land, and you're even given upgrades that grant the slowed time post-parry state for attacking into enemy attacks, because the system is so unwieldy, I assume. You have to meaningfully make use of regular moves, combos, juggles, parries when you can fit them, if you can fit them, because remember, you can't immediately cancel what you're doing into a parry like it's Bayonetta. And you make use of the tether and other combat mobility options like the dashing attack and directional jumping heavy attack. And I hope this sounds overwhelming because in case you were wondering if Elysium is squarely in the lineage of Valkyrie Profile games, I think it's pretty obvious. Hey, remember when I talked about Ryu and Dante and Bayonetta embodying their personalities in play? Ryu Hayabusa with his deliberate, precise strikes, Bayo with her raw style and overt femininity, and Dante with a truly free and creative play? How about the point in the Kingdom Hearts video about Sora's theme park ride moves being perfect for the character because they embody the youthful, fun-loving spirit the kid so obviously retains throughout the games? Play embodying character is kind of the ultimate goal of an action game. Valkyrie Elysium hands you a dutiful, single-minded lesser deity commander figure, and every single thing you do on hard mode and up is complex, requires split-second decisions, deliberate play thanks to recovery times, threat assessment, and squad management. Valkyrie Elysium's combat is a beautiful, beautiful design triumph, even if you'll never stick around to find out. I know. KBash, it's an action RPG, not an action game. Stop popping off with all that, but hear me out. This game legitimately uses a Ninja Gaiden technique, that essence charge stuff, directly in this game's combat system, integral to how it works. This game's parry might as well be Witch Time. Both of these are severely nerfed compared to how they appeared in their games of origin, but man, that is Ninja Gaiden! And more than the main game and its difficulties, there are, as always, things to do. The Seraphic Gate returns, but this time in an action game. We're going full-blown Bloody Palace, motherfucker. It's an incredible filter for old JRPG fans with terrible hands. And the Hilda's Vengeance mode is a decent time. It's just a full run of the game's levels and bosses backwards, and her gameplay is much more forgiving, high damage, and interesting overall. And look, she's got them proxy soldiers I talked about earlier on. The answer to the early game issue was there the whole time. Hilda's fun specifically for letting the player tack additional timed inputs onto attack strings, letting your combo paths branch out in new ways. It makes the game feel less stale. It grants the player an amount of control over a clumsy system that really helps clear up the pain over not having good instant guard cancel or dodge cancel options. What's with action games and leaving the better, more enjoyable, cooler character to DLC, huh? In spite of my commander combat thing, Elysium isn't really telling a new story. It's a Valkyrie Profile game, literally. To the T. You follow Odin's instructions, you meet up with various troubled ghosts and recruit them as Einherjar. And while this is all supposed to be dark and intriguing, the pervasive gloom and sullen performances, the flat atmosphere that permeates the runtime, though appropriate for the setting, it does nothing to endear the player. I don't know much about the soldier or the slave trader pretty boy or the knight, and I could read about them in-game. But why? In fact, the only thing that really made the party enjoyable came around the time the witch joined. She's surprisingly upbeat, really into the Valkyrie, and after hours of drab expressions and cold delivery, finally gets a smile out of the character. The thing felt good in that moment. It's exactly like everything else in the game. A slow burn to a mild payoff, but there's so little to go around, the emotional heft is elevated. Unfortunately, this humanizing process doesn't translate to the model. She's still, now and forever, Angie. Now we're gonna have to get into plot stuff, which really isn't like avoid at all costs levels like Xenoblade or Persona, so don't worry about it. Context matters more than the actual events. You're tasked by Odin to stop the impending disaster Ragnarok by going out and containing artifacts. You know the bit. Collect the plot coupons, save the world. Great. Only there's nothing really dramatic about it. Yes, the world will end if you don't is arguably sufficiently dramatic, but if the player puts the game down, no, it won't. And nothing actually hooks the player. Collecting Einherjar, doing a Valkyrie Profile thing, gaining a mechanical benefit, that's the strongest draw to play, which inarguably chafes with the play experience because of how limp you feel until you collect them. Regardless, the only two shakeups in this collectathon plot are a Zoomer-coded individual who's notable for following the party around and being the only living human you see, ever. Whatever, we all know not to trust that dripped up young man. I mean, I'm sorry. Where are you getting them threads, bro? How come your skin's all smooth? You moisturizing for the apocalypse, bro? Hilda occasionally pops in to challenge the player. She's a fallen Valkyrie, directly opposing Odin and serving Fenrir, who basically serves as the anti-Odin in the story. The issue is, these idiots are meant to tempt the player to the dark side, but there's a couple of problems. One, Fenrir is literally dripping with darkness and openly manipulative. It's not even subtle. You know when a YouTuber stretches as hard as possible to impart more meaning than necessary or appropriate to, like, Mario in a bid to make you cry? In most Mario games, you press A to jump. If only we all could simply tap a button and ascend beyond our limitations into new horizons. That's Fenrir. And Hilda sits there laughing at the player the entire game over not understanding why Odin is bad, actually.
Deluded. Me. That's rich coming from one of Odin's puppets. Do you have any idea what it is that you are saying? I see. So you still don't.
Why are you stopping?
I just realized that this fight is a waste of time. There is mercy enough left in me to spare another of Odin's victims.
So explain it. Explain why Odin sucks. I'll save some time. She doesn't. So the two potentially dramatic story elements are either annoying or nothing.
I don't care what Odin told you to do.
Yeah, okay, stuff it, broccoli head. The only thing driving the plot is the doubt over Odin. What if Odin sucks? Actually. But, guys, did you see him? There's never been a more mustache-twirling, knife-licking psychopath in a Valkyrie Profile game. This guy ties damsels to train tracks with music on full blast. Like, obviously he's evil.
You worthless imbecile!
And there he goes. What did I say? Yeah. Chuck, you ain't slick. Eventually, the Valkyrie turns against Odin and Fenrir and has to choose the fate of the world. In the normal ending, you defeat Fenrir, but never actually curtail Odin's machinations. The game ends early because you didn't speak to the Zumi in the final stage, nor collect enough cryptic flowers. The good ending and the bad ending require talking to Armand here. Same as before, you need to avoid at least one of the secret collectibles and then have a talk. You get this opulent cutscene that actually keys into the Valkyrie Profile legacy, trying to replicate the original romance between Lenneth and Lucian. They've got a similar story, and they even name-drop the Weeping Lilies. Except, this isn't one of the greatest PS1 JRPGs ever made. No one cares about Armand, and at this point, you're just baiting nostalgia, guys. I'm begging the scenario writer to have a pulse. Like, really, you're gonna whip out the one good scene and make it optional at the end of the game? After all this? Then you'll choose to run away with Armand, no thanks, or kill both Fenrir and Odin. A better ending all around, no real notes. The true ending is unlocked by collecting all the green flowers before starting the final chapter and doing everything else mentioned. You get your tearjerker, watch your friends poof, prevent Ragnarok, and take up the mantle of the gods to guide the world to a better future. Oh, and you get a scene with Armand too. Damn, is this Bayonetta 3? Because there's a better canon pairing right off stage left, bro. Now, Elysium does a lot of stuff right. In true Valkyrie Profile fashion, it obfuscates a lot of your benefactor's motives until very late, and positions the gods as abusive, manipulative, exploitative, parasitic, in a word, evil, but their status is maintained by power and the illusion that a world steward must necessarily exist. But this premise is flawed. If souls are not used wantonly for the gods and instead returned to the world tree, the world can be maintained regardless. As a piece of dramatic fiction, Elysium is ineffective. As a solid analogy for real-world hierarchies and the myths that perpetuate them, Elysium's great. As a Valkyrie Profile game, one of the first things to come out of Valkyrie Elysium discourse in general was the complaint that the Valkyrie doesn't get her finishing move, Nibelung Valesti, a Valkyrie Profile tradition, until very late. In case you were wondering if the discourse was serious. If you really get down to it, Valkyrie Elysium's greatest story sin is refusing to show a series of powerful interpersonal scenes between party members. That's really it. And it's probably due to the budget and the dev cycle. Valkyrie Profile 1 had a few, and they killed. And that's when it wasn't making you watch people get killed. 2 took the time to show plenty of inter-party interactions, calm and reflective moments. It's a slower story, a less pressing drama for most of the runtime, but it earns its epic payoffs. Even Covenant of the Plume tried to capture the oomph of 1 and Matsuno-esque writing. It's at least aspirational. Elysium is comparatively flat, and its payoffs aren't strong. We don't really get to know anybody on screen. We barely feel anything because so little of it is quality drama or emotionally impactful. It carries the lineage with traces of tragedies past, with a dying planet, and with a band of friends staring down the world's last act. But I wasn't there, man. I just watched it. Elysium is pretty limp overall. It's a play, it's a vibe, it's a solid system, but it doesn't grab people like other masters of the action genre, and its hybrid elements aren't as enjoyable as something like the Trials of Mana remaster. That said, I know there's someone the game speaks to out there, someone terminally angry, someone sick of being manipulated or puppeteered around, of the lies propagated by crumbling institutions driven primarily by greed and power, someone who has a hard time relating to other people and working with others. And that person can have their game and feel like a hero, get their good ending. I'm here for that. Unfortunately, you have not reached the end of the video. I wanted to tie up some loose ends regarding the Valkyrie Profile series writ large, and some of the things I let fall between the cracks, as one does. A few people asked me about Valkyrie Anatomia, the phone game, the gacha game, and I'm not sure how to say this without being a scumbag. But I can't think of anything more offensive to Valkyrie Profile as a series than giving any kind of weight or credence to that game. And that is not a shot at phone games in general. To be clear, I have now come around and believe that phone games are games, and people like me need to pull back a bit on my criticism. But the problem is that mobile gaming in general came into being, like, fully materialized at a time when the gaming industry was becoming a lot more craven and a lot more greedy, I guess. And perhaps because of mobile gaming's more disposable nature, the fact that we spend less time with our phones than maybe consoles, for example, and setting aside graphical limitations and whatever capabilities, many phone games, mobile games, just aren't that good or fun to play. And you see a great concentration of gacha games, games that are literally freemium schlock with gambling elements. And unfortunately, Valkyrie Anatomia is basically that. That's how it was reported. As I understand it, the game is dead. But really, even for fans of Valkyrie Profile, I don't think it really matters that people like me cover the game. Due to how it was packaged, due to its freemium elements, it is quite literally a nostalgia bait cash grab on old fans of Valkyrie Profile, which is kind of insane to me. Valkyrie Profile 1 is kind of inarguably a classic of the PSX era, something that I feel people like me hold a little bit sacred, at least insofar as gaming goes. And to pillage from that and reduce to something made to be consumed at a premium is, I mean, to me, a sort of spiritual death for the franchise. Because, like, I don't think fans are going to come out and bash me for not giving them adequate coverage on this title. Like, yes, the names, the faces, some of the gameplay, it's all familiar. You can use the Nibelung Valesti technique from all of the Valkyrie Profile games. But really, fans at that point had played 1, and they played 2, maybe they played Covenant of the Plume if my dates are correct. But after that, you know, they'd been waiting for Valkyrie Profile 3 for a very long time. In fact, in timeline, it kind of makes sense why Valkyrie Elysium received the backlash it did, at least from old fans, because you go from 1 to 2, which are very different games, but still classic JRPGs, and leave fans waiting for a proper follow-up. Like, Covenant of the Plume is nice, but it's not those 2 games. And then they hand you a phone game. And then years after that, they hand you like an action RPG, and it's not Valkyrie Profile, it's Valkyrie Elysium. And you know, you can see the lines, you can trace the contrails, how this outrage sparked. So yeah, I have nothing to say about Valkyrie Anatomia. One piece of criticism I got that I can absolutely understand where fans are coming from is not giving the games the appropriate time to truly bathe in them. But to be fair to me, my show's never really been about that. I've often covered games and had other people who had never played those games watch and find the videos interesting, but I very rarely strike a chord with old fans because, again, I'm not from a fandom space. I don't come from the fandom perspective. I don't have mountains and mountains of time to sink into any given game, and frankly, I think if you go from start to finish on most games, you've mostly seen the experience. And that definitely goes for JRPGs, where, you spend 30 hours with something, as opposed to, like, say, 10 hours with an action game of some kind. Like, I've literally spent 3 times the amount of time in that world. So my only real regret for my coverage of 1, I guess, is A, being myself and a little bit flippant, and 2, not covering the Seraphic Gate in detail. But I don't think it matters, because I don't think those people who usually watch my show are coming out to pick up a JRPG so they can then become a Shmaster, so they can go down the extraneous challenge mode associated. And that's true of all the games. I didn't cover it in 2 or 3 or 4. But I don't think it's necessary to looking at the games as a whole or understanding them. Valkyrie Profile 2, one comment I got that I thought was interesting and kind of was what I was getting at in the first place, but it says it in a different way, which perhaps I didn't get across, is that Valkyrie Profile 2 is not Lenneth's game, right? So Valkyrie Profile 1 and 2 are very, very different games, but I framed it in a very specific way. I framed it like 1 is this amazing classic and is very sharp, cropped, deliberate, something you can pick up and finish, and it feels like a good-ass meal. And 2 tends to drag. It's a lot slower, and that's, to be fair, a framing that comes from my own bias. Like, I always have enjoyed games like Ninja Gaiden and Devil May Cry more than 40-hour JRPGs, and I probably always will. I do like JRPGs regardless, but VP1 is much more in tune with the things I'm interested in to actually play than something like 2, which is a lot more, like, I want to say sloggy. I know people are going to find that kind of offensive, but, like, really, between menus and loading screens and how much time it takes to get started and finished with battle, you end up spending a lot of time in VP2 that isn't particularly exciting or interesting, and that's not inherently a problem. There are people who like to immerse and luxuriate in the games they play, like they're like hotel experiences, like an experience at a 5-star hotel or something. But I've never really done that, and furthermore, I'm not able to do that with my show. So, admittedly, 2 ended up feeling a lot like a slog, purely because it was physically sucking up my time. Less so than something like Xenoblade Chronicles, but not by much. Anyway, the comments are framed VP2 as Silmeria's game, and therefore it is, different, and that's a good... And I kind of was getting at that. That was kind of the conclusion of the video, is that I think it's actually smart that this game did not try to replicate VP1's successes and best elements. In fact, it actually veered off in many, many different directions in ways that are actually kind of interesting, considering VP1 is such a classic, like that they didn't cop from those elements. Anyway, I respect VP2 as a game, certainly the story as well, but it's, again, like many games, Xenoblade Chronicles, Persona, etc., you often don't get to feel the impact until the very end, which can be a challenge for your general audiences. That's all. Covenants of the Plume, my major regret is not finishing every single arc of the game, but I also don't think it's terribly necessary. I didn't plumb the depths of that game the way I might some other ones, mostly because I thought the video was doomed. And this is like a YouTube lesson in general that, like, if you're gonna put a ton of effort into something, you better damn well get the payoff. I think back to one of the first times I didn't put any effort into something where I wasn't trying my ass off, and that was the Anime Fighters video. Horrible Anime Fighters, you probably know me for it. And that video I kind of just jerked into the universe, and it did so well. It is in fact the #1 video on my show, and it was kind of that moment where I realized if you put endless effort into something, you end up burning yourself out and feeling like garbage when it doesn't go anywhere. And admittedly, that's kind of a toxic mindset. You should strive to put what you can into what you do for the people who are going to engage with it anyway. But I still didn't really feel it with Coom anyway. I just wasn't vibing with the game all that much. Though I like the, again, Matsuno-esque writing, which maybe is a misnomer, because in fact, in FFT, and specifically the PSP version, that's what I'm referring to, that like that dressed up kind of language. But I believe the guy who did that, and I believe it was the same guy for Vagrant Story as well, is a translator who actually like made it Shakespearean, not the actual writing of the original game's text. Like the script isn't written like that in Japanese. So Valkyrie Elysium, I tried to cut a lot of slack with. It's a game that I think actually does a lot of good and is very interesting, and it's very, very obviously constrained by the budget or the development that, you know, created it. It is not a complete game the way you would understand something like Valkyrie Profile to, I don't think anyway. I could be wrong, but to me it reeks of it needed some work. In fact, it launched with a whole extra mode, you know, in patch 1.03, which is thankfully the one I covered with Hilda's Vengeance and stuff. But you know, what do you say to the people who covered it on release? Because Valkyrie Elysium, as I outlined in the video, and I hope it's obvious, really doesn't do itself any favors. Like, yes, there's a very broad stream of gamer reviewer positivity that's brewing up in spaces like mine, people like Thor High Heels and Clemps and others. I think that's kind of been flourishing for a few years, but hasn't really penetrated the mainstream because it's very easy to become a reactionary or see something and gut react, call it bad. It's bad. That's that. And there's no further investigation or fairness given to the devs or the conditions that the game was produced under. And to be fair, you know, as the consumer, you were given the product and the game launched at full retail, so what are you going to do about it? And so it's all very difficult. There are ideological lines being drawn here. But Valkyrie Elysium, again, does not do itself favors with random players because it starts so slow. It feels physically miserable until very late and until you know quite a bit and have most of your skill trees unlocked in all 4 dudes. And again, that's why I tried to say, you could do the thing they did in Hilda's Vengeance, where you have 4 faceless puppets that become people as you recruit Einherjar in your bar. But that even begs the question, like, would the game be fun without parry? And you know, because you can unlock a parry you get for attacking into enemy attacks, which makes it so much easier to parry. It's not funny because the game is not built from the ground up with parry in mind, certainly not in its main combat like interactions. You know, you are not attacking so you can stop and then parry at the perfect moment, because you really have to stop mid-combat in a game that is all about momentum, if you ask me. Now, one thing is that a lot of people told me, hey, did you know Valkyrie Elysium is actually devved by some ex-Ninja Gaiden people? And I did not know that, actually, which is what, it's funny that I noticed the soul charge and I was like, that's Ninja Gaiden, and people had to, like, I couldn't have just looked it up like a dumbass. So yes, Valkyrie Elysium has those trace action game roots, specifically because of its dev staff, which is really interesting. And I think that's kind of why I jived with it, because for a long time I was having zero fun playing it. And then I got the soul charge ability and used it and realized, oh my God, This is like a less good Ninja Gaiden. Epic, but with other, gameplay tack on thing like party members and stuff. Summonable party members that are on a timer. Anyway, so Valkyrie Elysium I still think is fun. I still think a lot of people don't give it the credit it deserves. And admittedly, yes, like Thor High Heels outlined in his own video, there is a story if you're willing to trudge through all the extra content. But again, like I mentioned with the game doing itself no favors, a lot of that content, if you're playing on normal mode, for example, is superfluous. Like you'll unlock a health upgrade as though I need that on normal mode. And then, with that being the end game of rewards is like upping my bar a little. You're also forced to play through in a system you probably already are kind of iffy on. Another mission in another zone you've already done before with the same enemies you've been mashing away on forever. Like, to call the game anything above like an 8 out of 10 feels fairly dishonest to me, because like it is not, and I don't even like number systems, it's just not very varied or novel or interesting, or it doesn't hook the player. And what it gives you in story is so much text instead of cutscenes, probably because of the budget being, shredded, but still, what the actual physical product is not terribly enticing. And that sucks, because, you can see why fans are pissed, in a way, right? Valkyrie Profile 1 feels like this should be something. And you go to 2 and it's good. Great for some players. And you go to Plume and it's like, what the f***? And then you get to Anatomia and it's like, how the f***? And then you get to Elysium and it's like, how do we get here? How do we get here? Like, anyway, I'm not a community figure, so those people probably are pissed off at me for one or two things I mentioned in the videos and have cast me off eternally, but I genuinely am interested in the Valkyrie Profile series. What's really crazy to think is that Valkyrie Elysium could one day not resemble the coverage that I gave it, because, again, and this is true for the day oneers too, games get patched so frequently these days, it feels, when you're a reviewer, that there's no real value in even bothering with something that just came out, because patches eliminate so many problems. And I think it's still important to chronicle the lifetime of a game, because you don't know when support for something is going to be cut, and Valkyrie Elysium may never get a patch again because it's tanked in sales as far as I understand. But, the coverage will always be changing as long as the game is changing. Like, one day, the Rapier Bulwark, I think that's what it's called, the Rapier may one day be fast enough to actually meaningfully be called the fast weapon in the game. Damn. It's even funnier, because I don't think I explained it very well. It is still faster in frames, I think, even if it's minuscule, but because it locks you into so many attacks, and the game has no instant cancel options, it doesn't matter that it's a few frames faster, because it still feels like crap to actually play, and you might as well just pick up the main sword. It's such a depressing meta. And it's weird too, coming off the Ninja Gaiden people, and part of why I didn't want to bring it up, and part of why I don't feel that bad that I didn't mention it, because like, if that's the pedigree, how do we end up with this, guys? And again, I have to guess that they were fishing to, build up that strategy commander feel in gameplay. It's just a shame it didn't come across for a lot of people, I think I'm the only one who I even heard talk about it. But maybe I'm giving too much critical credence to something that was kind of shuffled onto a team and put out into the market. It's dead. Who knows? One thing that I got some pushback on was my insistent coverage of the games from, how do I say this, a somewhat political lens. But the thing is, a lot of JRPGs, if you're not aware, are pretty expressly political. That doesn't necessarily mean, and that goes for a lot of games as well, and it's worth understanding, if you're hearing my words as controversial right now, that political in games doesn't mean it focused on a real political struggle or whatever. It often means that the game simply picks up on innately political concepts, like power discrepancies between stratified people in a society, for example. That's something that's, existed all throughout human history, period. That is fundamentally political. The fact that lords, for example, hoard wealth and at the expense of the poor in society generally, like feudalism, for example, like extracting a certain amount of money so that the state apparatus or the political power in the region can maintain that power by drumming up enough support with the military, by controlling the most resources, by expanding territories. And that lens is something I had to use looking at Valkyrie Profile, purely because it is a game about deities who go down to Earth to walk amongst the people, specifically Lenneth, who is kind of an intermediary between, mortal and deity in a way. The fact that she comes from mortal blood and has been raised to deity status, but not high deity status, which is why she's able to do that, presumably. Why she's able to, unlike the other gods, and certainly because of her bloodline, which we're not going to get into right now. The fact that she can grow and change as a being. It's also weird to me that there are any kind of, let's say, reactionary people, non-empathetic people in the Valkyrie Profile fandom at all. Because if they played the games, and specifically one, two, let's just say all of them. Take VP1, for example. Lenneth finds genuine camaraderie with mortals and forms deeper bonds, I would argue, certainly on screen, with those mortals than with the deities of Midgard. And that's certainly all we see in game anyway. That's the only textual evidence we have, really, of her forming relationships with people. She clings to those people, and she feels bad for those people. She even saves, like, truly irredeemable people like Badrak, the thief and murderer Badrak. Like, she saves this person. Valkyrie is someone with endless empathy for the human species and the conditions they exist under. Cut to Valkyrie Profile 2, where we play as, granted, an outcast member of royalty, but still, Alicia the Mortal teams up with Selmyria to overthrow the yoke of the gods, which is unmistakably a parallel between the common folk overthrowing their oppressors, who, in that universe specifically, are the gods. Granted, at the same time, a deity literally gets the guillotine. To read VP2 as apolitical is, I don't know how else to say this without being rude, but is to be willfully ahistorical. The parallels are so obvious and so resounding throughout history that I would say that if you look at it as apolitical, fundamentally, you just have an aversion to the word political. Like, that word makes you bury your head in the sand, when it's a whole body of literature, a whole understanding, a whole history of human experience. It is worth taking the time to research. And that's why I came at it from that lens. I understand that makes some people uncomfortable, so kind of sorry if you feel uncomfortable about that kind of thing, but we do that here, so. Hard-hitting coverage at the KBash show. And again, picking up with Coom, the game is expressly political. It is literally about, the B-plot anyway, about a political struggle between two forces. Not dissimilarly to something like Final Fantasy Tactics, where the War of the Lions breaks out in a struggle for succession or whatever. Differing factions propping up differing people to... It's a giant thing. I love that game, man. Coom is not that story, but it does have elements of that story. The actual A-plot, the fundamental thing on screen at any given time, is Wilfred's really misguided quest to strike down the Valkyrie, which you could, again, read with even like 1 ounce of like a critical lens. One single dip into the lining between reality and fiction. Buddy is a commoner who lost his dad, and his commoner mother went insane. So he goes to seek vengeance against a literal deity, okay, a Valkyrie, who's otherwise understood as good by everyone, because Wilfred perceives that she has done something to ruin his family. Which, again, is totally insane and incorrect, just based on the, cosmology rules of the world presented. Especially because it is not the Valkyrie who killed Buddy's father, but rather war, human conflict in general. Kind of the B-plot and what it deals with is what killed Wilfred's father. And we can look at that concept as expressly political. His delusional quest mimics a lot of real-life delusions people cast on themselves regarding who is their oppressor and who isn't. Granted, all this framing leaves a lot of wiggle room to read the game swinging in either direction, which is why I focus on empathy as something Valkyrie Profile cares about and where I'm basing my lens in. Because if its politics are fundamentally the politics of empathy, I think the game's in a good place. Even in Elysium, we see the threads of empathy being important. And this is kind of where the devs didn't get enough credit. The Valkyrie in Elysium specifically has no real connection with humans, her emotions, anything. She's kind of a robot, like an empty vessel. But spending time with humans, or I guess dead humans, but that's irrelevant, it fills her up a bit. She becomes a more full individual, like a more rounded person. It's actually like another human. I'm not going to spoil the story in this section of the video in case you've missed it. It is that other human who brings her back to humanity, who makes her understand a lost fragment of her lived existence. And if we understand that humans in Valkyrie Profile as a series exist as separate from the gods, basically at their whims, mercy, lesser beings by design in the world, we can see the Valkyrie bridging the gap between gods and men as not only fundamentally empathetic, but also political. It's something that champions people's rights. It's a game that advocates those in power, uplifting those who are weak and struggling. It's a genuinely beautiful message. So yes, Valkyrie Profile good, Valkyrie Profile fun. It is a bit to get into if you're not really a huge JRPG head or don't like being timed or this and that and the other thing. Frankly, all the games are different, so if you walk in, it's a varied, interesting series for someone like me who does all things, a person for all seasons and all people. Valkyrie bless. And for the chuckle f*** on Twitter who said Valkyrie Profile 1 isn't depressing. Have you played the game for more than 10 minutes? Do you have a pulse? Are you okay? Seek help!